I love Banjo-Kazooie. I love the Game Boy Advance. This makes it so disheartening that Banjo-Kazooie's oft-forgotten GBA spin-off Grunty's Revenge is forgotten for a reason. Despite a surprisingly accurate translation of the gameplay from Banjo-Kazooie's N64 Duology at first glance, Grunty's Revenge boasts none of its depth of its predecessors, and ranks as the worst game the Bear and Bird duo have starred in. Yes, even Nuts and Bolts had more going for it. Strangely, Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge was the first game released by developer Rare after they had been purchased by Microsoft. The game had gone through a few different development phases over a couple of years, and by the time Rare became Microsoft's property, Grunty's Revenge was too far in production to scrap entirely. Thankfully for Rare, Microsoft's lack of handheld gaming platform meant they could still legally release the game on Nintendo's handheld, but required a middleman publisher since neither Microsoft nor Nintendo could do the honors, which seems so silly in retrospect now that we live in a time when Xbox Live can be played on Nintendo Switch. THQ ended up being the publisher, and Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge saw release in 2003 to little advertisement and fanfare. To bring in a bit of personal history, I didn't even know about the existence of the game ahead of its release. Banjo and Kazooie were in a Game Boy Advance game apparently. I was energized to be beyond any doubt, but it didn't take exceptionally long into the game to realize that Grunty's Revenge was something of a step in reverse for handheld gaming. Harkening back to the times of the original Game Boy when the move of a franchise to a handheld more often than not implied the compromise of its quality. Consider how well so numerous of the Game Boy Advance library have held up over long time. And Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge imperfections are as it were amplified with hindsight. Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga was released the very same year on the GBA, but you'd never know it from the contrast in quality between the games. Taking place between Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie, the evil witch Gruntilda travels back in time in an attempt to prevent Banjo and Kazooie from ever meeting. With the help of our favorite shaman, Mambo Jumbo, Banjo is sent after Grunty to foil her devious plan. And while that's about the extent of the storytelling, it's okay, because collectathons like this are about adventuring. For the most part, Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge delivers, even if it's an unexpectedly short experience. The game plays exactly how you might imagine Banjo-Kazooie to play on a handheld system. Most of the signature moves remain, and you'll even rendezvous with Mambo on occasions to transform into a handful of different critters and other various things such as a tank or a candle. The biggest difference here is that instead of presenting the game in a full 3 dimensions, you're limited to an overhead fixed camera angle and a pre-rendered graphical style which faithfully recreate the characters and enemies from the N64 games. When you first start the game, it looks promising. Even though the GBA didn't have the power to recreate a full-on 3D platformer in the vein of the N64 Banjo-Kazooie titles, Grunty's Revenge still does a solid job at finding a way to translate the series' gameplay to the handheld. And despite the GBA's relatively few buttons, A and B on the face of the system, plus 2 shoulder buttons, Grunty's Revenge even does a pretty good job at making Banjo and Kazooie's move feel reminiscent of their classic N64 outings. Even the iconic gibberish voices return. But those similarities are short-lived, unfortunately. There are 5 worlds to visit, 6 if you include the hub world Spiral Mountain, each containing the myriad of collectibles that should be familiar to veterans of Banjo-Kazooie series. In each one of these worlds, you'll need to obtain a certain amount of Jiggies, which will grant you access to the next area. To earn Jiggies, you'll need to do some tricky platforming, complete fetch quests, win at minigames, and so on. If any of this sounds familiar to you, that's because it is. Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge is a very straightforward and conventional adventure platformer. As stated, the game actually does a decent job at bringing the series gameplay to the GBA, but the more you play Grunty's Revenge, the more you realize how stripped down it is. Sure, the transition to a handheld system back in 2003 was going to come with a few expenses, but this sadly isn't a simple case of a simplified Banjo-Kazooie on the go that might have actually been pretty sweet. As stated, Grunty's Revenge harkens back to the days of the original Game Boy when a popular franchise making its way to a handheld device meant its quality was going to suffer. Also, the boss fights suck, largely due to their lack of creativity and challenge and their sheer repetition. There are a handful of minigames thrown in to distract from the intermittent platforming woes, and while these are ultra simplistic in approach, many are surprisingly fun. Most notable of these will have you fishing for X amount of fish in a limited time. This functions in a simple way. Move right and left and hold B to cast your line according to the distance of the fish. To make matters worse, some waters will also be crowded with crabs called snippets, and you'll have to avoid catching this in your line or risk losing a honeycomb's worth of health. Don't expect the minigames to be robust or in-depth. These are short, simplistic, brainless segments. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but there is actually one thing that Grunty's Revenge does better than its otherwise far superior N64 predecessors, and that's how this time around the different transformations provided by Mambo Jumbo carry over to the subsequent levels once unlocked. This means that the transformations actually have more uses here, since you'll have to revisit Mambo's hut in a particular level to utilize a different transformation in order to nab a Jiggy or two. Though it must be said that even this element suffers from a lack of communication to the player, as one stage features a Jiggy that needs a later transformation to obtain, with the game never even hinting that to be the case. Going back to my personal history with the game, I gave up on it for a time back when I was younger because of this segment, in which I had no earthly idea what I was supposed to do. The other Banjo-Kazooie games could get a little cheeky and have a character or Google-eyed object tell you when something was meant to be revisited at a later time. While that may be a bit overt, it's certainly a better option than leaving the player entirely clueless. And while in cons, the idea of Mambo changing you into any available form on a given level is an improvement for the transformation concept, it still never reaches its full potential for the aforementioned reason that the objectives themselves feel so uninspired. Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge isn't a total waste. As previously stated, the visuals find a way to bring the look of the N64 games onto the GBA with surprising accuracy. Similarly, the music captures the familiar charm of the other Banjo-Kazooie games, and the initial feeling of the controls is how you would imagine Banjo-Kazooie should play on the handheld system. But Grunty's Revenge ultimately stumbles because of how far it misses the target on any of its concepts. That initial feeling of this is how Banjo-Kazooie should play on a handheld quickly fades away as you realize that accuracy only exists on face value. It soon becomes apparent that Grunty's Revenge fails to realize what made the Banjo-Kazooie game so memorable to begin with, and just cups up a cheap imitation of what a Banjo-Kazooie game should be. The setups of time travel and separating the heroes don't come into play in either the story or the game itself in any meaningful way. When it's all said and done, it's completely possible to see everything Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge has to offer in about 4 to 5 hours. While this may seem like a short adventure for Banjo-Kazooie, it's not too uncommon for a handheld game. It's just too bad there isn't any incentive to keep playing once you wrap up the main quest. Needless to say, if you're looking to browse auction sites or retro sections of stores to make a purchase, you may want to do so at a bargain price because there isn't much replay value. Thankfully, it's a thoroughly enjoyable 4 to 5 hours that should please most fans of the series regardless of its compressed length. Grunty's Revenge is only kind of Banjo-Kazooie, just enough to pique the curiosity of my younger self, but not nearly enough for it to live up to the bear and bird duo who adorn its title. It's not even in the same ballpark. Now we only need a racing game. Hell yeah!